The north is cold and full of whispers.
The red mountains of Dorne shimmered in the heat. 7 riders approached a tower that stood alone against a bruised sky. Eddard Stark led them, his face gray with exhaustion and dread. He had not slept in days. The war was over. Robert had killed Rhaegar at the Trident, the Mad King was dead, the Targaryens had fallen. But Lyanna was still missing. And now, finally, he had found her. 3 men in white cloaks stood before the tower entrance. Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, held Dawn, the legendary greatsword forged from a fallen star. Beside him stood Sir Oswell Went and Lord Commander Gerald Hightower, the finest knights in the 7 kingdoms, pledged to defend their king. But their king was dead, so why were they here? I looked for you on the Trident, Ned said. We were not there, Gerald Hightower replied. His voice was old iron. Woe to the usurper if we had been, said Sir Oswell. When King's Landing fell, Sir Jaime slew your king with a golden sword, and I wondered where you were, Ned continued. Far away, Sir Gerald said, or Aerys would yet sit the Iron Throne, and our false brother would burn in 7 hells. I came down on Storm's End to lift the siege, Ned told them. Lord Tyrell fled before me to Highgarden. Mace Tyrell left only his steward to hold Storm's End when he departed. The castellan yielded to me. I came here. We swore a vow, said Arthur Dayne. They drew their swords. The fight was brutal and short. Ned's companions, Lord Willem Dustin, Ethan Glover, Sir Mark Ryswell, Martin Castle, Theo Wool, and Howland Reed, fought with desperate courage against 3 of the greatest knights who ever lived. But courage was not enough. One by one, Ned's friends fell. Willem Dustin died with Arthur Dayne's blade through his heart. Ethan Glover took a sword thrust from Oswell Went. Martin Cassell, Theo Wool, and Mark Ryswell all fell to the Kingsguard's swords, their blood staining the red sand darker. Ned fought Arthur Dayne himself, ice against dawn, but the Sword of the Morning was the finest swordsman in Westeros. Within moments, Ned was on his back, Arthur's blade descending toward his throat. Howland Reed stabbed Arthur Dayne from behind. The Cranagman's blade found the gap beneath Arthur's arm, sliding between the plates of his white armor. Arthur staggered, turned, and Ned drove ice through his chest. The Sword of the Morning fell. Sir Oswell died next. Then Lord Commander Hightower. When it was over, only Ned and Howland remained standing, both wounded and bleeding. 7 had gone in. 2 came out. Ned ran toward the tower, his heart hammering. The door hung open. Inside, stairs spiraled upward into darkness. He took them 3 at a time, Howland limping behind him. The room at the top smelled of blood and roses, blue winter roses, Lyanna's favorites, covered every surface. They had been placed in clay pots scattered across the floor, woven into garlands that hung from the ceiling. The room was beautiful and terrible, filled with flowers and death. Lyanna lay in a bed soaked with blood. She was 16 years old and looked like a corpse. Her skin was pale as snow, her dark hair plastered to her face with sweat. A baby wailed beside her, newborn, red-faced, squalling with healthy Stark lungs. A handmaiden knelt by the bed, pressing cloth against Lyanna's body, weeping. Ned, Lyanna whispered. Her voice was barely audible. Ned, you came. Lyanna. Ned fell to his knees beside the bed. What did they do to you? What did he... Promise me, Ned. Her hand reached for his, weak as a child's. Promise me. Howland Reed pushed past Ned and looked at Lyanna with the eyes of a man who had seen this before. In the neck, women died in childbirth regularly. The Crannog women had their own midwives, their own healers, because maesters would not come to the floating castles of Greywater Watch. Howland knew what he was seeing, postpartum hemorrhage from a uterus that had failed to contract after delivery, the most common killer of new mothers in all of Westeros. And he knew he had perhaps 30 minutes to save her. Move, Howland snapped at the handmaiden. She stumbled backward, shocked by the command. Howland placed his hands on Lyanna's abdomen, one inside, one outside, and began firm, sustained compression. Bimanual uterine massage. The technique was ancient, older than maesters, passed down through generations of Cranogman healers. Boil water, Howland barked at the handmaiden. Bring me yarrow, shepherd's purse, any herb you have in this tower. Now, move. The handmaiden fled. Howland continued the massage, his small hands pressing rhythmically against Lyanna's womb, forcing it to contract, mechanically closing the blood vessels that were hemorrhaging her life away. From his belt pouch, Howland produced dried herbs wrapped in oilcloth, the same pouch that held the poisons for his arrows. Cranogman knew that the line between poison and medicine was merely a matter of dose. He crushed yarrow and shepherd's purse between his fingers and forced the bitter mixture into Lyanna's mouth. "Swallow," he commanded. "Swallow or die." Howland did not stop the massage. His arms began to shake from the effort, but he continued. The handmaiden returned with boiling water and clean cloth. Howland packed the wound, layering the cloth methodically. Ned knelt helpless beside his sister, holding her hand, watching Howland work with desperate hope. 30 minutes, the bleeding slowed, then stopped. Lyanna's eyes fluttered open. She looked at Howland with something like recognition. "You," she whispered. "The Cranog man. From Harrenhal." "Aye, my lady." Howland's voice was gentle now. "You defended me once, I'm returning the favor. The baby is fine. Healthy. Loud." Howland glanced at the squalling infant. A boy. Lyanna began to cry. Not from pain, but from relief. "I'm not dying." "Not today." Howland sat back, exhausted. "But you need a maester. Proper care. This is only the beginning of your recovery." Ned stood abruptly. "Starfall. It's the nearest castle. I'll send a rider immediately." He looked at Howland. "Stay with her. Don't let her move. Don't let her—" His voice broke. "I won't let her die," Howland promised. "Go." Ned descended the tower stairs and found one of the horses still alive, his own, drinking from a trough near the base of the tower. He scrawled a message on parchment from his saddlebag and sent his fastest remaining man riding west towards Starfall, seat of House Dane. Then he returned to his sister. Over the next hours, as Lyanna stabilized and the immediate crisis passed, the truth emerged in whispered, exhausted conversation. The baby was Rhaegar's son. Rhaegar had not kidnapped Lyanna. She had gone with him willingly. There had been a ceremony, a septon, vows spoken before witnesses, though whether it was a legal marriage or something else, Lyanna was unsure. Rhaegar had believed he was fulfilling a prophecy, something about a prince that was promised, something about the dragon having 3 heads. None of that mattered now. Rhaegar was dead, his chest crushed by Robert's warhammer at the Trident. Elia Martell and her children, Rhaenys and baby Aegon, had been murdered during the sack of King's Landing. Their bodies presented to Robert wrapped in Lannister crimson cloaks. Robert had called their deaths justice. If Robert discovered this baby was Rhaegar's son, he would kill the child, immediately, without hesitation. "What name did you give him?" Ned asked quietly. "Aegon," Lyanna whispered. "Rhaegar wanted—" She stopped, saw Ned's expression. "That name is death, isn't it?" "Yes." Lyanna looked at her son, sleeping now in the crook of her arm. He had dark hair, Stark dark, not Targaryen silver. Gray eyes, not violet. He looked nothing like Rhaegar. He looked like a Stark. "Then, we'll call him Jon," Lyanna said. "Jon Snow." "Snow? You'll claim him as your bastard." Lyanna's voice was stronger now, the tea Howland had given her restoring some of her strength. "Tell everyone you fathered a child during the war. With some woman. It doesn't matter who. The realm will believe it. Men father bastards all the time. No one will question it." "Lyanna, I can't. You must." She gripped his hand with surprising force. "And her voice broke. "I have to marry Robert." "What?" "It's the only way to keep the peace. If I refuse him, his obsession will turn to suspicion. He'll search for me. He'll ask questions. The only safe place for me is beside Robert, where I can control what he knows. Where I can—" She stopped, tears running down her face. "Where I can watch over my son from a distance. You're asking me to raise your child as mine while you marry the man who would kill him." "Yes." Lyanna looked at the baby. "Promise me, Ned. Promise me you'll love him. Promise me he'll never feel alone. Promise me he'll never know the truth. Not until he's old enough to understand what it would cost." Howland spoke from the corner of the room. "I was there for the whole conversation. I'll keep the secret. On my honor as a Cranogman, on the debt I owe to the Knight of the Laughing Tree." He looked at Lyanna. "You saved me at Harrenhal. I'll keep your son's secret until the day I die." Ned looked at his sister, at the baby, at Howland. He thought of Robert, drunk and raging, calling for Targaryen blood. He thought of Rhaegar's other children, murdered in their beds. He thought of the realm barely holding together after years of war, balanced on a knife's edge of peace. "I promise." Ned said. I'll love him as my own. I'll protect him, and I'll never tell anyone the truth. Lyanna wept with relief and grief in equal measure. She held her son for hours, memorizing his face, because she knew this might be the last time she could hold him freely for many years. 3 days later, a maester arrived from Starfall. Maester Wendell, elderly but skilled. He examined Lyanna, pronounced her stable but in need of weeks of rest, and administered milk of the poppy for pain. He cleaned her wounds with boiling wine, applied herbal poultices to prevent infection, and established a careful recovery schedule. Lyanna would need to remain at Starfall for at least a month before any travel. She was pale, weak, and visibly fragile. But she was alive. Ned spent those weeks making arrangements. He commissioned the tearing down of the tower. Let no monument stand to this place of blood and sorrow. He built 8 cairns for the dead, 3 Kingsguard and 5 of his own men. He returned dawn to House Dane with the news that Arthur had died nobly. He arranged for a wet nurse, a young woman from Starfall named Willa, to care for the baby, and he sent a raven to King's Landing, to Robert Baratheon, with a message carefully worded to reveal nothing. I have found my sister. She lives. I am bringing her home. Robert's response came within days. Thank all the gods, old and new. Bring her to King's Landing immediately. I will marry her the moment she arrives. Ned read the letter and felt ice settle in his stomach. Robert still believed Lyanna had been kidnapped, still believed he was rescuing his stolen love. He had no idea that Lyanna had gone willingly, that she had borne Rhaegar's child, that the baby Ned would bring north as his bastard was the son of the man Robert had killed. The lie was becoming real, inescapable, necessary. 6 weeks after the Tower of Joy, Ned rode north toward King's Landing with his sister, a baby, and a wet nurse. Lyanna was still recovering, thin, pale, moving carefully, but strong enough to travel. In Ned's arms, wrapped in soft gray cloth, was Jon Snow, the boy who was really Jon Targaryen, the prince hidden as a bastard, the secret that could shatter the realm. Howland Reed rode with them as far as the neck, then disappeared into the swamps of Greywater Watch, carrying the truth with him like a stone in his heart. King's Landing stank. After weeks of travel, Ned had almost forgotten how badly the capital smelled. 1 million people pressed together, their waste running through the streets, the summer heat making everything worse. He rode through the gates with Lyanna beside him, both of them trying not to show their disgust. Robert met them in the throne room. The new king looked older than when Ned had last seen him, harder, with new lines around his eyes and gray in his black beard. He wore a crown of gold and rubies shaped like stags. The Iron Throne loomed behind him, ugly and jagged, built from the 1,000 swords of Aegon's defeated enemies. But when Robert saw Lyanna, his face transformed. The hardness fell away, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. Lyanna, he said. Just her name, as if it explained everything. Lyanna dismounted with Ned's help and walked toward Robert. She moved carefully, still recovering, still weak, but she held herself with the dignity of a Stark. She stopped before the Iron Throne and inclined her head. Your Grace, she said. Robert descended the steps in 3 long strides and pulled her into an embrace. I thought you were dead. I thought, his voice broke. I killed him for you. I crushed his chest with my hammer. For you. Lyanna stood stiff in his arms. Ned saw her hands clench at her sides, saw the effort it took not to pull away. She was performing, playing the role of the grateful rescued maiden. Thank you, she whispered. Robert pulled back to look at her face. Gods, you're thin. What did they do to you? Did Rhaegar hurt you? I'm alive. That's what matters. Lyanna's voice was steady. I want to go home, Robert. Back to the north. Back to Winterfell. You will. After we're married. After. Robert stopped, seeming to realize he was rushing. Jon Arryn says we should wait. Give you time to recover. But Lyanna, I've waited so long. The war is over. The realm needs stability. A Stark-Baratheon alliance will bind the kingdoms together. We can. I'll marry you, Lyanna interrupted. But not yet. Give me a few weeks, please. Robert's smile could have lit the throne room. Anything you want. Anything. He barely glanced at the baby in Ned's arms. Ned had introduced Jon as his bastard, fathered on a woman named Willa during the campaign. Robert had shrugged. Every man fathered bastards during war. It meant nothing. But Jon Arryn noticed. The hand of the king, tall, gray-haired, grave, looked at the baby with thoughtful eyes. He said nothing, but Ned saw him calculating, analyzing. Dangerous. Jon Arryn was dangerous, not because he was cruel, but because he was intelligent and observant. Ned would have to be very careful around him. Over the following weeks, preparations began for the royal wedding. Seamstresses measured Lyanna for gowns, the High Septon was consulted about dates and ceremonies, lords from across the Seven Kingdoms sent gifts and pledges of support, and in Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister received news that made his jaw tighten with rage. Robert was marrying the Stark girl. The alliance Tywin had been carefully negotiating, the marriage of his daughter Cersei to King Robert, was dead. Cersei would not be queen. Lannister blood would not sit the Iron Throne. Tywin had already been humiliated once when Mad King Aerys refused to betroth Cersei to Prince Rhaegar, calling her his servant's daughter. Now Robert was passing her over for the same northern girl Rhaegar had preferred. The insult was intolerable. Tywin sent a raven to King's Landing declining his invitation to the wedding. He would not attend, he would not celebrate his house being cast aside. And in her chambers at Casterly Rock, Cersei Lannister received the news and felt something inside her calcify into pure hatred. She was 20 years old and had been raised to be a queen. Her entire childhood, her father had told her she would marry a prince. First Rhaegar, then Robert. She had dreamed of wearing a crown, of ruling the Seven Kingdoms, of being the most beautiful and powerful woman in Westeros. And now a northern girl, a horse-riding, sword-fighting, winter-loving wolf bitch, had stolen both her promised princes. First Rhaegar had crowned Lyanna Queen of Love and Beauty at the tourney of Harrenhal, humiliating Cersei in front of the entire realm. Now Robert was marrying her. Cersei remembered the prophecy Maggie the Frog had told her as a child. Queen you shall be, until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down. Lyanna Stark was beautiful in that northern way, wild and strange and magnetic, and Lyanna Stark had just stolen Cersei's crown. The hatred would never fade. Cersei would spend the rest of her life waiting for a chance to destroy the she-wolf who had taken everything. The wedding took place in early 284 AC at the Great Sept of Baelor. The Sept was the grandest in the Seven Kingdom, built of white marble with 7 crystal towers that caught the sun and threw rainbows across the plaza. Inside, the high dome depicted the 7, father, mother, warrior, maiden, smith, crone, and stranger, in brilliant colored glass. Lyanna wore gray silk trimmed with white fur, stark colors, not the cloth of gold most queens chose. In her dark hair she wore a crown of winter roses, blue as frost. She was 16 years old and looked ethereal, like something from the old songs. Robert stood beside her in black and gold, the crowned stag of House Baratheon emblazoned on his chest. He could not stop smiling. To him, this was the culmination of everything. The war, the throne, the crown. He had won. He had saved his beloved. The songs would remember this day forever. The High Septon spoke the vows. Lyanna repeated them in a clear, steady voice that gave no hint of the screaming inside her. Robert's voice was loud and triumphant. When the High Septon said, "You may kiss your bride," Robert pulled Lyanna close and kissed her in front of the entire assembled nobility of Westeros. The crowd roared approval. Ned stood among the witnesses and watched his sister's face. Only he saw the way her eyes drifted toward the windows, north, toward Winterfell, and the sun she had left behind. The feast afterward lasted for hours. Robert drank heavily and laughed too loud and told stories about the war. Lyanna sat beside him on the dais, smiling at the appropriate moments, performing perfectly. Among the crowd, Ned noticed certain absences. Tywin Lannister was not present. Neither was his daughter Cersei. House Lannister had sent a representative, some minor cousin, with a token gift, but the lord and his family had stayed away. The slight was deliberate and dangerous. Everyone noticed. Jon Arryn noticed too. After the feast, he found Ned in a quiet corridor. "Your sister is queen now," Jon said without preamble. "That means House Stark and House Baratheon are bound permanently. It's a powerful alliance. Without Tywin's gold, the crown will face financial difficulties. Robert spent lavishly during the war, and the throne's debts are considerable." Jon paused. "I can manage it. But you should know, we've made an enemy of the richest man in Westeros." "Tywin will come around," Ned said. "He's a pragmatist. He'll accept the new reality. Perhaps. Or perhaps he'll nurse his grudge and wait for an opportunity to strike." Jon looked at Ned thoughtfully. I'm glad you're here, Ned. Robert needs people he trusts, and I need allies on the small council who care more about the realm than their own advancement. I'm going home, back to Winterfell. Not yet. Stay a few more weeks. Help me establish stability. Then go north with my blessing. Jon hesitated. And Ned, take care of your bastard. I saw how you look at the boy, like he's more than just some wartime mistake. Ned's heart hammered. He's my blood. Indeed. Jon's expression was unreadable. Blood is important, but sometimes the truth of blood is complicated. Wouldn't you agree? That night, alone in the royal chambers, Lyanna stood by the window and looked north. Robert was asleep, drunk, snoring, oblivious. He had been gentle with her, or tried to be, but Lyanna had felt nothing but revulsion and duty. She thought of her son, Jon, nearly 2 months old now, dark-haired, gray-eyed, already being carried north by Ned to Winterfell. To the home Lyanna would not see again for gods knew how long. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and wept silently. The cage had closed around her. She was queen of the 7 kingdoms, and she had never been more trapped. Ned rode north from King's Landing with an escort of 20 men, a wet nurse, and a baby who was starting to notice the world around him. Jon was a quiet child, watchful, alert, but rarely crying. Willa, the wet nurse from Starfall, said she had never seen such a calm infant. He's studying everything, she said, like he's trying to understand. They traveled the King's Road north through the Riverlands, past the inn at the crossroads, through the neck where Howland Reed's people watched from the marshes, but did not show themselves. Finally they reached Winterfell. The castle rose from the landscape like something grown from the earth itself. Gray stone walls, 8 towers, the smoke from the hot springs making it look like it was breathing. The Stark banner flew from the battlements, a gray direwolf on a field of white. Home. Ned rode through the gates and was greeted by the household. Old Man, the ancient storyteller, clucked over the baby. Maester Luwin examined Jon with a maester's clinical eye and pronounced him healthy. The servants whispered about Lord Stark's bastard, this child born of some southern woman during the war. Ned let them whisper. The story needed to spread, needed to become accepted truth. 3 weeks later, Catelyn Tully arrived from Riverrun. Ned's wife came with her own escort, her father's bannerman, and a baby of her own. Robb, born at Riverrun 9 months after their wedding. Catelyn was 19 years old, auburn-haired, with her mother's Tully beauty and her father's Tully pride. She had expected to find her husband waiting for her. She had expected a warm welcome, a reunion after months apart. Instead, she found a bastard already installed in her new home. The servants showed Catelyn to the Lord and Lady's chambers. Ned was there, standing by the window with a baby in his arms. Not her baby. A different baby, dark-haired, gray-eyed, watching Ned with that strange, quiet intensity. Catelyn, Ned said, you're here. Thank the gods. Whose child is that? Her voice was ice. His name is Jon. Ned stopped. We need to talk. Privately? About the child you fathered while I was pregnant with your true-born son? Catelyn's fury was cold and controlled. She had been raised to be a great lady, to manage her emotions. But this was too much. The servants are already talking, Ned. They say you brought him here before I even arrived, that you gave him a place in your house before you gave me one. It's not what you think. Then what is it? Then he said, come with me. He led her down through the castle, past servants and guards, down stone stairs that grew older and darker the further they descended. Finally, they reached the crypts of Winterfell. The crypts were vast, a labyrinth of stone corridors lined with the statues of dead Stark lords going back thousands of years. Each statue held a sword across its knees, the iron blades meant to keep vengeful spirits in their tombs. Torches burned in iron brackets, casting dancing shadows. Ned stopped before a newly carved statue. The face was still rough, the stonemason was not yet finished, but Catelyn could see it was meant to be Lyanna Stark, Ned's sister, the girl who had been kidnapped and started a war. Except Lyanna was alive. She had married Robert. She was queen now. So why was there a statue? This is for the Lyanna who died, Ned said quietly. The girl who went south and never came home. The sister I lost. This tomb will stay empty. But I wanted her remembered here among her ancestors. I don't understand. Jon is not my son. Ned turned to face her. He's Lyanna's, Rhaegar Targaryen's and Lyanna Stark's. If Robert ever discovers the truth, he will kill the boy, and possibly Lyanna. I claimed Jon as my bastard to protect them both. The words hung in the cold air of the crypts. Catelyn stared at her husband. You're lying. I wish I were. Ned's voice was heavy. Lyanna was never kidnapped. She went with Rhaegar willingly. There was some kind of marriage. Whether it was legal, I don't know. But the child is real. Rhaegar's son, born in a tower in Dorne. Lyanna nearly died in childbirth. She would have died if Howland Reed hadn't saved her. Then why? Because Robert would kill the boy. He called the murder of Rhaegar's other children justice. He would do the same to Jon without hesitation. Ned gripped her hands. Lyanna is married to Robert now. It was the only way to keep the peace, the only way to keep Jon safe. She had to give up her son and marry the man who would murder him if he knew the truth. Catelyn's anger drained away, replaced by something more complicated. She thought of Robb, sleeping in the nursery upstairs. She thought of being forced to give him away, of watching someone else raise him, of marrying a man who would kill him. "Oh gods," she whispered. "Lyanna, I need you to keep this secret," Ned said. "I need you to help me protect him. No one can know. Not the children when they're born, not the household, not anyone. If this comes out, it means war. Treason, death." Catelyn looked at the baby in Ned's arms. Jon was awake, his gray eyes moving between them, watching. "He looks like a Stark," she said. "Yes. Thank the gods for that. What happens when he grows older, when he starts to look like Rhaegar? He won't. The Targaryen look comes from the silver hair, the violet eyes. Jon has neither. He'll look Stark all his life." Ned paused. "But even so, we need to be careful. Robert can never see him, never have reason to look closely." The baby's fingers closed around hers instinctively. She thought of Lyanna sitting in King's Landing, playing queen, unable to hold her own child. "We'll protect him," Catelyn said. "All of us. It's what family does." The household arrangement developed over the following weeks. Publicly, Jon was Ned's bastard. The servants believed it. The guards believed it. The story was that Ned had met a woman named Willa during the war. Some said she was a Dornish noblewoman. Others said she was a tavern wench. The details varied. And Jon was the result. Bastards were common. No one questioned it too closely, but privately, within the family's personal chambers, Jon was loved. Catelyn treated Jon and Robb identically. Both babies slept in cribs in the nursery. Both were fed from Willa's milk. Both were held and sung to and cared for without distinction. When Ned held Jon, he did not hide his affection. When Catelyn rocked Jon to sleep, she did it with the same tenderness she showed Robb. The servants noticed that Lady Catelyn was remarkably kind to her husband's bastard. They attributed it to her generous Tully nature, her piety, her gracious heart. Old Nan said, "Lady Catelyn has a heart as wide as the trident. That's Tully blood for you." Maester Luwin said nothing, but he watched. He noticed things. He kept his observations to himself. The arrangement worked. Jon and Robb grew up as brothers in truth, if not in name. They shared a nursery, shared toys, shared old Nan's stories about the long night and the last hero and the children of the forest. But Ned and Catelyn carried the weight of the secret together, and it changed their marriage. They could not speak of it openly, not to friends, not to bannermen, not even to Robb when he grew old enough to ask questions. They developed a private language of glances and silences. When ravens arrived from King's Landing, Ned's hand would tremble slightly opening the seal. When visitors from the south came to Winterfell, Catelyn would position herself near Jon, ready to shield him. Every letter from Lyanna was written in careful code. She would ask about the children, and how the household fares, and whether the winter roses are blooming in the glass gardens. Ned would read between the lines. "How is my son? Is he well? Does he laugh? Does he cry? What does he look like?" Ned would write back with equally coded responses. "Young Robb is growing fast, and his companion is just as strong. They play together in the Godswood. The dark-haired one favors climbing, while the auburn-haired one prefers swordplay. Both are healthy, both are happy." In King's Landing, trapped in her golden cage, she would read Ned's words over and over, memorizing every detail about a son she could not hold. And at night, after Robert fell asleep drunk beside her, Lyanna would stand by the window and look north toward Winterfell, toward the child who would never know her as his mother, and she would weep. 5 years passed. In King's Landing, Lyanna Baratheon, née Stark, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, had learned to wear a mask so well she sometimes forgot what her real face looked like. She had done her duty. She had given Robert a son, a true-born Baratheon heir, dark-haired and blue-eyed, whom she named Edric. She loved the boy fiercely, and that love was genuine and uncomplicated in a way almost nothing else in her life was. When she held Edric, she was simply a mother. Not a queen, not a prisoner, not a woman performing contentment for a court full of watching eyes. But every time she looked at Edric's black Baratheon hair, she thought of another dark-haired boy growing up in the snow of Winterfell. Robert was everything she had feared, and nothing she had hoped for. He was not cruel, not to her, at least. He was loud and boisterous, and he drank too much, and he had already taken at least one mistress that Lyanna knew about, and probably more. That she didn't. He hunted constantly, held tournaments that bankrupted the treasury, and spent his evenings feasting with knights who told him he was magnificent. He hated governing. The small council meetings bored him within minutes. He delegated everything to Jon Arryn, who managed the realm with quiet, exhausted competence, and Robert accepted this arrangement gladly because it meant he could go hunting. Jon Arryn ran the Seven Kingdoms. Robert Baratheon sat the throne. What hurt Lyanna most was not Robert's neglect or his infidelities. It was the dawning understanding of what she had destroyed when she agreed to keep the secret. She had told herself she was protecting Jon, and she was. But she had also condemned herself to a life that was half a life full of performance and empty of truth. She managed the court. She cultivated alliances carefully, corresponding with Catelyn and the Tullys, maintaining northern ties through carefully worded letters to Ned's bannermen. She ran the royal household with the efficiency of a woman raised to manage a great castle. The ladies of the court respected her, even if they did not always warm to her northern directness. But she was never free. The Lannister problem festered beneath the surface like a wound that would not heal. Without Cersei's marriage to Robert, House Lannister was excluded from the inner circle of power. Jon Arryn had tried to manage Tywin's resentment with offers of small council positions and trade concessions. But Tywin Lannister was not a man who accepted consolation prizes. He had wanted his daughter's blood on the Iron Throne. He had wanted Lannister gold financing the crown, Lannister soldiers backing the king, Lannister children inheriting the kingdom. Instead, he had a Stark queen, a financially struggling crown that borrowed heavily from the Iron Bank of Braavos, and 15 years of accumulated grievance. Tywin had withdrawn to Casterly Rock with the cold dignity of a man who was waiting, not accepting, not forgiving, just waiting. And Cersei was at court now. Robert had insisted on it, some gesture of goodwill toward Tywin that Jon Arryn had arranged. She moved through King's Landing's halls with her golden hair and her green eyes and her perfect courtesy, smiling at the appropriate moments, never once showing the furnace of hatred that burned behind her face. But Lyanna knew. The way Cersei looked at her, just a fraction too long, just a fraction too cold, told Lyanna everything she needed to know. Cersei had been promised a crown twice, and twice Lyanna had taken it from her. First Rhaegar at Harrenhal, where he had crowned Lyanna Queen of Love and Beauty in front of the entire realm. Then, Robert, who had chosen the northern girl over Tywin's daughter. Cersei was poison in a beautiful cup. Lyanna kept her distance and watched her carefully. What Lyanna did not yet know, could not yet know, was that Cersei had already begun working against her. Small things. Whispered suggestions to ladies of the court that the queen's northern manners were cold. Casual mentions to Robert that Lyanna seemed disinterested in him. That perhaps she missed the north too much. Careful intelligence sent to Tywin at Casterly Rock. The crown's financial vulnerabilities, the king's growing dissatisfaction, the political pressures that could be exploited. Cersei was planting seeds. She was very patient about seeds. Lyanna wrote to Ned every few weeks and received his coded replies with a hunger that frightened her. Jon was 4 years old now. Jon was climbing the castle walls despite every prohibition. Jon had made friends with a raven in the rookery. Jon had beaten Robb at swords with a wooden training blade for the first time, and had looked guilty rather than triumphant about it. That last detail made Lyanna laugh until she cried. Her son feeling guilty for winning. That was Rhaegar in him, that melancholic, self-doubting quality. But it was also Stark. The Starks always worried about doing right. She kept a single blue winter rose pressed in a book, the last flower from the Tower of Joy, dried and brittle now. She would not let it go. In 289 AC, Balon Greyjoy declared himself king of the Iron Islands, and launched his rebellion. Robert rode to war. Watching her husband ride out through the gates of King's Landing with 20,000 men, Lyanna felt two things simultaneously: relief and terror. Relief because he was leaving and she could breathe again. Terror because if he died, everything changed. A dead Robert meant succession struggles, political chaos, danger for Ned and for Jon. Robert crushed the Greyjoy rebellion within a year. He and Ned fought together again for the first time since the original rebellion, and something of the old fire came back into Robert during those months of campaign. He returned to King's Landing victorious, healthier than he had left, with Theon Greyjoy in tow as Ned's ward. He also returned with a new mistress, which Lyanna absorbed with the same quiet fury. She absorbed everything Robert did that she could not stop. The reunion between Robert and Lyanna after the campaign was the moment she was most grateful for her mask. He came to her chambers with wine and good cheer, triumphant from war, and she smiled and poured him more wine and listened to his stories about the fighting. That night, after he slept, she looked north and thought of Ned. 6 years old now. Jon was 6 years old. She did not allow herself to think about everything she was missing. Not the first lost tooth, not the first horse, not the first time he asked a question that revealed the mind working behind those quiet gray eyes. She had chosen to miss all of it. She made the choice again every day, because the alternative was Jon's death. 9 more years passed. It is 298 AC. Jon Arryn is dead. The news reached Lyanna through Robert's announcement at the small council table. Jon Arryn, who had been more a father to Robert than Lord Stephen Baratheon ever was, who had held the realm together through 15 years of Robert's negligence, who had been Hand of the King since the rebellion ended, was dead of a sudden fever. Lyanna sat at the small council table and kept her face neutral while her mind raced. Jon Arryn's death was suspicious. The man had been healthy. He was old but vigorous. And in the weeks before his death, several small council members had noticed he was distracted, asking strange questions, doing research that nobody could identify. Maester Pycelle had administered milk of the poppy for Jon Arryn's pain. Lyanna did not trust Pycelle. She had not trusted him for years, but she kept that observation to herself. Robert's response to Jon Arryn's death was to want Ned. He announced at the small council table that Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell would be the new Hand of the King. Ned won't want it, Lyanna said carefully. Robert waved his hand. Ned will do what's right. He always does, and what's right is coming south and helping me govern this kingdom before it collapses. He looked at Lyanna. Write to him. Ask him to come. He'll listen to you. Lyanna thought about Ned in Winterfell, about Jon, now 15 years old, growing up in the north. If Ned came south, Jon would be left at Winterfell with Catelyn and the children. That was safer. Jon was safer in the north. But if Robert came to Winterfell to ask Ned personally, which he was already suggesting, then Robert would see Jon for the first time since the Tower of Joy. Jon was 15 now, no longer a baby. A young man with gray eyes and dark hair and that quiet, melancholic bearing. The thought made Lyanna's blood go cold. Robert, she said carefully, if you want Ned to come south as your hand, write to him. Don't make the journey yourself. You have too much to manage here. With Jon Arryn barely cold, the court is unsettled. Leaving King's Landing right now would send the wrong signal. Robert considered this. Or, we go north. We bring the whole court to Winterfell. Let the northern lords see their king. Show them some respect. Lyanna opened her mouth to argue. It would mean I could see my sister, she heard herself say instead. And it was true. She had not seen Catelyn in years. Not properly. They wrote letters, but it wasn't the same. Robert was delighted. There you go. We'll make a royal progress of it. The whole court, north to Winterfell. Ned will say yes when we're standing in his great hall. Littlefinger made a note on his ledger. Lyanna looked at the Master of Whisperers and felt the familiar chill. The bald eunuch with his little birds, his network of informants that stretched across the 7 kingdoms, had been watching her carefully for years. She didn't know what he knew. She didn't know what he suspected. She wrote to Ned that night in their private code, beneath the ordinary news about Edric's education and the progress of the new tower being built. Robert is coming north. He won't be dissuaded. Prepare the household. Keep the dark-haired one close. I'm afraid. The royal procession rode through the gates of Winterfell on a gray morning. Lyanna was in the front of the column, beside Robert. She saw the castle she had grown up in. The gray walls, the 8 towers, the smoke from the hot springs rising into the cold air. She smelled the north pine trees and cold earth and wood smoke, and the particular clean sharpness of winter air that King's Landing never had. For a moment, her throat closed completely. She was home. She had not been home in 15 years. The household was assembled in the courtyard. Ned stood at the front with Catelyn Robb, 17, auburn-haired, built like Ned but with Catelyn's coloring, and the other Stark children. Sansa, 11, looking exactly like a miniature of Catelyn. Arya, 9, already fidgeting in her dress. Bran, 7, who had to be stopped from climbing one of the towers when he was supposed to be preparing to greet the king. Little Rickon, just 3. And beside Robb, slightly apart from the others, stood Jon Snow. Lyanna's heart stopped. He was 15 years old. She had last held him when he was hours old. In between, there had been only Ned's coded letters, a pressed blue rose, and 15 years of grief. He was tall for 15, lean and dark, with Stark coloring, dark hair, gray eyes, the long face of the Stark line. He stood slightly apart from Robb, not because he was excluded, but because that quiet separateness seemed to come from within. He was watchful. Still, his gray eyes moved across the procession with careful attention, cataloging, assessing. Then his eyes found Lyanna. He did not know who she was to him. He saw a queen, the queen, Robert's wife, his Uncle Ned's sister, and he inclined his head with the respect a bastard shows royalty. His expression was courteous and closed. Lyanna had 15 years of iron discipline behind her. She forced herself to look away, to look at Ned, to smile as a sister smiles at a brother she has not seen in too long. But in the fraction of a second she held Jon's gaze. She saw it, the thing she had feared and longed for in equal measure, the thing that could destroy everything. In a certain light in the winter morning, with the gray sky above Winterfell making all colors more honest, Jon Snow's eyes were not entirely gray. They held a depth, a violet-gray darkness, like indigo glass lit from within. Rhaegar's eyes, nobody else would notice. Nobody else had spent 15 years memorizing Rhaegar's face from descriptions and from the portraits that had survived the sacking of King's Landing. Nobody else would know what to look for. But Lyanna knew. Robert was dismounting beside her, booming with laughter, clapping Ned on the back with the force of a man trying to drive him into the ground. Ned, gods, you look old. Fat? No. You never get fat, do you, you miserable northern bastard? Ned laughed and said the right things and managed the greeting with perfect composure, but his eyes went to Lyanna's face for one fraction of a second. Asking a question, she gave the smallest possible nod. He's safe. Don't react. Keep going. The feast that evening was everything northern feasts were supposed to be. Enormous amounts of food, too much ale, dogs under the tables, fire in 3 great hearths. Robert sat in Ned's chair at the high table, because Robert sat at the head of every table in the 7 kingdoms. That was the prerogative of kings. He ate with enormous appetite and told war stories to the Stark household and was genuinely, boisterously happy in a way Lyanna had not seen him in years. The North suited Robert. He was a man who needed cold air and open spaces, and people who did not constantly want things from him. In King's Landing, everyone at court was performing all the time. In Winterfell's hall, Ned's household just ate and drank and listened to old Nan's stories. Robert was relaxed, which was dangerous. A relaxed Robert was an observant Robert. He noticed Jon Snow during the second course. Lyanna saw it happen. Robert's eyes found Jon at the table, drawn perhaps by the same quality that drew everyone's attention to Jon. That quiet watchfulness, that bearing that was slightly too composed for a bastard boy at a northern feast. Robert studied Jon's face for a long moment. Lyanna's hands were still under the table, her fingers pressed into her own thighs hard enough to leave marks. Robert looked away. He called for more wine. He went back to telling his story about the boar hunt at Storm's End. He had not recognized anything. Not yet. But the seed was planted. Over the following days, Lyanna found reasons to be near Jon. She knew it was reckless. She knew every instinct for self-preservation said to stay away from him, treat him as she would treat any northern bastard, give Robert nothing to notice. But she had waited 15 years for this. She went to the training yard on the second morning, ostensibly to watch Robb and Arya practice. Jon was there, sparring with Robb under the instruction of Ser Roderick Cassel, the master-at-arms. Jon fought beautifully. That was the only word for it. Where Robb's fighting style was powerful and direct, Stark fighting, taught in the northern tradition of strength and aggression. Jon moved with a fluid precision, that made every strike look inevitable. He circled, he feinted, he found the angles that weren't obvious. He made it look like dancing. Robb was better at brute technique. Jon was better at everything else. Sir Roderick Cassel watched them with a combination of pride and perplexity, as if he could not entirely explain where Jon's style had come from. He had taught both boys the same foundation. Robb had built on it with stark directness. Jon had somehow developed something else, a quality that wasn't northern, that Ser Roderick could not name. Lyanna could name it. She recognized Rhaegar's influence the way a musician recognizes a key change. Subtle, undeniable, heard only by someone with the right ear. Jon finished the session and noticed Lyanna watching. He approached with the formal courtesy of a bastard addressing a queen. "Your Grace, you fight well," Lyanna said. "Who taught you?" "Ser Roderick. And Lord Stark some." "And," he paused, "I read about fighting as well. In the library, old texts about tournament champions." "You read?" "Constantly." Something shifted in his face, a fractional relaxation, as if she had asked the right question. "There's a collection in the library about the old Kingsguard, about Sir Riam Redwine and Sir Duncan the Tall. Their techniques." He paused again. "And some texts there's one about a prince who was a great warrior, but had never wanted to be, who taught himself to fight because he read a prophecy that convinced him he had to." He looked away. "I found that one interesting." Lyanna's breath caught. He had found texts about Rhaegar, stumbled onto them in the Winterfell library without knowing why they called to him. "Do you know which prince that was?" she asked carefully. "Prince Rhaegar Targaryen." Jon said it without any particular inflection. "Mad King Aerys's son. The one who—" He stopped himself, looked at Lyanna. "Your brother killed him. At the Trident. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. My brother Robert killed him," Lyanna said. Robert was not her brother. But the lie was so deeply constructed at this point that even she used it sometimes. "You don't need to apologize for history. There's something strange about him," he said. "About everything I've read about him. He was supposed to be terrible, a kidnapper, a monster who started a war. But the things people write about him, even people who hated him, don't sound like a monster. They sound like someone complicated." "Most people are complicated," Lyanna said. "Yes." Jon was quiet for a moment. "I dream about dragons sometimes," he said abruptly, and then looked embarrassed as if the words had come out without permission. "I know it's only dreams. It doesn't mean anything." Her son, standing 3 feet away from her, telling her about his dreams, not knowing that he was the blood of the dragon. "You remind me of someone I knew once," she said softly. "Someone brave and sad and beautiful." Jon stared at her. "Your Grace?" "It's nothing. You fight well, Jon Snow." She turned before he could see her face. "Keep reading those old texts." She walked away without looking back. Behind her, she heard Jon watching her go. Catelyn found her an hour later in the Godswood, her hand pressed against the weirwood tree, the carved face with its weeping red sap watching her with ancient eyes. "You spoke to him," Catelyn said. Not accusing, observing. "I couldn't help it." Lyanna turned. "He found texts about Rhaegar in the library. He dreams about dragons. He doesn't know why. Blood calls to blood." Catelyn sat on the bench near the dark pool. She looked tired. "Lyanna, Robert noticed him at the feast. I saw it. I saw it too. Robert is going to ask Ned to come south as hand. If Ned leaves, I'll be here alone with Jon. And if Robert ever comes back north again, or if Jon ever comes south, he can't come south. Not ever." Lyanna sat beside Catelyn. "He needs to stay in the north. If I could arrange for him to go to the wall, he's 15. He can't take the black at 15. No, but in 2 years he could." Lyanna rubbed her face. "I hate this. I hate that the safest future for my son is a life of vows on a frozen wall. There may be other options, when he's older." Catelyn looked at the weirwood. "He's a good boy, Lyanna. He's grown up happy here. He loves Ned. He loves the children. He trains hard. He studies hard. He has a gentleness about him that none of the other children have." She paused. "He's extraordinary and he doesn't know it. He's Rhaegar's son. He's yours," Catelyn said firmly. "Don't forget that. He's your son. He has your stubbornness and your fire behind all that quiet. He just buries it because he thinks he has to earn his place here." Lyanna pressed her hands against her eyes. "I want to tell him. God's cat. I want to tell him so badly, Every time I look at him. Not yet. Not while Robert is in this castle. Caitlyn's voice was very firm. Maybe not ever, if the secret can hold. They sat together in the godswood, while the wind moved through the weirwood's red leaves, and neither of them spoke, that the secret was running out of time. Robert asked Ned to be his hand on the third day. He did it in the crypts of Winterfell, before the statues of the dead Stark lords. Lyanna stood apart, watching. And he was honest in the way Robert was only honest when he was sober. He told Ned the realm was in trouble. He told Ned he was drowning in debts and politics, and people who all wanted something from him. He told Ned he needed someone he trusted. Ned refused 3 times. And 3 times Lyanna caught his eye and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Accept. I need you in King's Landing. Come south. Finally, Ned accepted, not happily. But he accepted that night. Robert celebrated with a feast and too much wine and a triumphant speech about the strength of the Stark-Baratheon alliance. Lyanna sat beside him and smiled at the appropriate moments and drank water from a cup she told everyone was wine. Later, when Robert was asleep, she went to Ned's solar. They sat across from each other in the flickering candlelight, 2 siblings who had built their lives around protecting a secret, who had not spoken openly about any of it in 15 years. He's going to notice, Ned said. He did not specify who. He did not need to. I know. The eyes, Ned, you can see it if you look at the right angle in the right light. Rhaegar's coloring is there. Buried, but there. Robert hasn't seen it yet. He noticed Jon at the feast. He studied his face. Lyanna wrapped her arms around herself. Ned, we have a few weeks. Whatever is going to happen soon. If Robert sees something, he'll come to you first. He'll ask, the same thing you've said for 15 years. He's your bastard. You fathered him during the war. There's nothing more to know. And if he pushes, then push back. Lyanna looked at her brother. You've been doing this for 15 years. You're the most honorable man alive, Ned. Ironically, that makes you credible when you have to lie. Nobody expects you to deceive them. I hate it, Ned said quietly. Every time I tell it, I hate it more. I know. Lyanna reached across and took his hand. So do I. But we don't have another choice. Not yet. Not while Robert would kill him for existing. Ned gripped her hand. What about Littlefinger? I noticed him watching Jon at the feast. Lyanna went very still. What did you see? The same thing you did. That Littlefinger noticed something. He watches people like a cat watches mice, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for things he can use. Ned's voice was careful. I don't know if he's already made a connection. But if he has, Littlefinger tells people what they want to hear at the price they least expect to pay. Lyanna thought of the master of coin, his mockingbird pin, his easy smile. He's been useful enough to keep him close, but I've never trusted him. He plants whispers. He lives on other people's secrets. Does he have anything to plant about us? But if Robert starts asking questions, Littlefinger will find a way to feed them. That's what he does. Lyanna stood. Watch him. In King's Landing, watch him every moment. He's more dangerous than Cersei because he doesn't care who wins as long as he benefits. She went to the door, then stopped. Ned, in the morning before the court wakes, can I see him? Just for a moment. Just to... She stopped. I won't say anything. I just want to watch him train, watch him without having to pretend I don't care. Ned's face was full of grief. Yes. Before dawn. He trains early. Thank you. She slipped back to the royal chambers and lay down beside her sleeping husband and stared at the ceiling until the sky began to lighten. Before dawn, Lyanna stood in the shadows of the gallery above Winterfell's training yard and watched Jon Snow practice alone. He had risen before the household, before even the servants were moving. In the gray pre-dawn light, with frost on the ground and his breath misting in the cold air, he worked through forms with a sword, not sparring, not competing, just practicing. The same movements over and over, seeking precision. Ghost sat nearby watching. The white direwolf was already enormous for his age, his red eyes tracking Jon's movements with uncanny intelligence. Jon trained the way people pray, with total absorption, with a kind of devotion that had nothing to do with ambition and everything to do with something internal. He was not trying to be the best. He was trying to be right, trying to find the perfect movement, the perfect form, the precise expression of the skill in his body. Rhaegar had been the same way with music. Barristan Selmy had said so once, at a small council meeting, when someone mentioned Rhaegar in passing. He played the high harp the way other men breathe, not for others, for himself, because something in him needed to. Lyanna pressed her back against the cold stone of the gallery and breathed carefully. 15 years of secrets, 15 years of letters read and burned, of coded questions and careful answers, 15 years of looking north from southern windows. And here was her son, alive, strong, growing into someone extraordinary. She watched him for an hour. She did not announce herself. When Jon finished his forms and began cooling down, she slipped away before he could look up and see her in the shadows. She carried the image of him with her all the way back to King's Landing. That lean, dark figure moving through winter darkness, becoming himself without knowing who he was. The royal court departed Winterfell 3 days later. As the procession formed up in the courtyard, Robert was boisterous and loud, clearly pleased with the visit. Ned's decision to come south his hand had put him in excellent spirits. The North had welcomed him warmly. He had hunted and feasted and felt like a king rather than a prisoner of the throne room. He was saying farewell to Ned when it happened. Jon stood with the Stark household watching the departure. Robert turned from Ned and his eye found Jon in the crowd. He stopped. The boy was standing in morning light, better light than at the feast, clear northern winter light that showed colors honestly. Robert stared. Something moved across his face that Lyanna could not entirely read. Not recognition, not yet, but something. An unease, a splinter in the back of his mind. Jon noticed the king watching and inclined his head respectfully. Robert stared for 2 seconds longer than was natural. Then he looked away, swung into the saddle, and called for the procession to move. But Lyanna had seen it. She had seen the moment the splinter entered. She rode beside Robert out of Winterfell's gates and did not look back at the castle, though every part of her wanted to. The column moved south along the King's Road. Robert rode in silence for a mile, which was unusual for a man who normally narrated everything. Finally, he said without looking at her, "Your brother's bastard. What about him?" Lyanna's voice was perfectly even. "The boy, Jon Snow. He has a strange look about him, something." He shook his head. "Never mind. It's nothing. Jon Snow is Ned's bastard," Lyanna said. "He's been raised at Winterfell since he was born. Ned thinks well of him." Robert chewed on something internally. Strange eyes. Dark eyes. Most Northerners have dark eyes. "What's the mother's name again?" "Willa," Lyanna said. "A woman Ned knew during the war. Never met her." "No." Lyanna held his gaze when he looked at her. "Neither have I." Robert studied her face for a moment. Then he nodded and urged his horse into a faster walk. The splinter was there. She could not remove it. She could only hope it would not fester. And in Winterfell's great hall, Ned watched the royal procession disappear around the bend in the King's Road, and felt the first cold premonition of what was coming. 6 months after the royal visit, in King's Landing, Jon Arryn was dead. Lyanna sat at the small council table and maintained her expression of appropriate grief, while her mind moved quickly through what this meant. Jon Arryn had been investigating something in the weeks before his death, asking questions of armorers' apprentices, poring through histories of the great houses, making inquiries that nobody could connect to any obvious political purpose. She did not know yet what he had found, but she knew someone had silenced him before he could share it. Maester Pycelle had administered milk of the poppy during Jon Arryn's illness, standard treatment for fever and pain. Pycelle had served on the small council for 30 years, and had the dusty, harmless appearance of an old man past his usefulness. Lyanna had long suspected Pycelle of reporting to Tywin Lannister, but suspicion was not proof. The question of who had killed Jon Arryn, and why, was a problem she could not solve from inside the small council chamber. She needed information. She needed someone she could trust to investigate quietly. She needed Ned. Robert announced his intention to name Ned as the new hand within a day of Jon Arryn's death. Lyanna did not argue. She had already reached the same conclusion, independently. But she also needed Ned to know one other thing. She found a moment alone, truly alone, no servants, no guards within earshot, and wrote a letter to Ned that did not use their usual code. This was too urgent for subtlety. "Jon Arryn is dead. I believe he was murdered. He was investigating something before he died. I don't know what. Robert wants you south as hand. Come. But Ned, before you send your household ahead of you, before you organize the journey, go to the Winterfell Library, the Targaryen histories, the genealogies. I think Jon Arryn was investigating bloodlines. I think Pycelle may be working for Tywin. I think something is coming. Come south. But come careful. She burned the letter after sealing it. Then she resealed another letter, in code, ordinary, asking after the children, and sending sisterly greetings, and sent that one instead. Some truths were too dangerous for parchment. They would have to wait for the conversation in person. She sat by her window that night, after Robert was asleep, and looked north. Somewhere up there, Jon Snow was sleeping in Winterfell. He was 15 years old and he did not know what he was, and the world was about to come apart. She pressed her fingers against the cold glass. Hold on, she thought, in the direction of a boy who could not hear her. Just a little longer. Hold on. Ned arrived in King's Landing on a gray afternoon with 50 household guards, his daughters, and the weight of 15 years pressing on his shoulders. Lyanna met him privately the evening of his arrival, in a small solar adjoining the royal chambers that Robert never used because it had no hunting trophies on the walls. They had perhaps an hour before Robert would notice her absence. She told him everything she knew about Jon Arryn's death. Jon Arryn had been investigating bloodlines. Specifically, he had been comparing the physical characteristics of Robert's acknowledged bastards against the royal children. Robert's bastards, Maya Stone in the Vale, Gendry at a King's Landing armory, Bara at a brothel in Fleabottom, all shared the same trait: black hair, dark eyes, powerful Baratheon builds. The seed is strong. Robert's blood dominated every union. The royal children had Baratheon coloring as well. Edric, Lyanna's son, was black-haired and blue-eyed. That was genuine. But Jon Arryn had not been investigating Lyanna's children. He had been investigating something else entirely. Something about Cersei. Cersei, Ned said. I think so. Lyanna kept her voice very low. She has a child now, a boy named Joffrey, born 3 years ago. Robert, supposedly. But I've watched Cersei for years, Ned. The way she looks at Jaime Lannister when she thinks nobody is watching. That's not proof. No. But Jon Arryn was collecting proof. Visiting armorers' apprentices. Gendry is apprenticed to a smith, Robert's bastard. Comparing him to Joffrey. The same investigation we discussed. The same pattern Jon Arryn was following. She looked at her brother steadily. If Cersei's children are Jaime's and not Robert's, that's treason. That's incest. That's the succession built on a lie. Ned rubbed his face. If Jon Arryn discovered that, Cersei would have had him killed. And Pycelle has been reporting to Tywin for years. I've suspected it for a long time. If Cersei needed someone to administer poison quietly and call it fever, Lyanna spread her hands. Ned was quiet for a moment, thinking, this changes everything. If I investigate this as Hand, if I find evidence that Joffrey and the other children aren't Robert's, and Stannis Baratheon, not Joffrey, is the true heir. Stannis already suspects. He left King's Landing before Jon Arryn died. Wouldn't say why. Went back to Dragonstone. Jon Arryn had apparently been in contact with him. Then Stannis knows, or knows enough. Lyanna's voice was precise. Ned, this is separate from our secret. Completely separate, but it's just as dangerous. If you begin investigating Cersei's children, and she realizes what you're doing, she'll come after me the same way she came after Jon Arryn. I'll be careful, Ned said. Jon Arryn was careful. I'll be more careful. Lyanna almost smiled at the stubbornness in his voice. It was so Ned. So absolutely, irredeemably Ned. He would do the right thing and trust that honor would protect him, and she would spend every day terrified for him. One more thing, she said. Littlefinger. What about him? He's been watching Jon at the feast. He's been watching me watch Jon. He knows something, or suspects something, and I don't know which is worse. She gripped the edge of the table. He came to see me 2 days ago. Just a social call. Completely innocent on the surface. But at the end, he said, almost as if it were nothing, that he had always thought Lord Stark's bastard had unusual eyes for a northern boy. Ned went very still. He said it and smiled and left. Lyanna continued. He didn't ask anything. He didn't threaten anything. He just said it and walked away. He knows. He suspects. Or he's fishing to see my reaction. Lyanna's voice was carefully controlled. Either way, he's dangerous. Keep him close so you can watch him. Don't give him anything he can use. And Ned, if he approaches you about Jon, about anything related to Jon, I'll handle it. He helped me once, years ago, when I was navigating some court politics. I was grateful. I gave him too much access. She looked down. I was lonely and he was clever and I made a mistake. Don't trust the warmth he shows you. It's always a transaction. Ned nodded. I'll be careful of him. They sat together in silence for a moment, siblings separated by thousands of miles for 15 years, finally in the same room, carrying the same impossible weight. Ned, Lyanna said quietly. How is he? Ned's expression softened. He's extraordinary. He doesn't know it. He goes out of his way not to seem extraordinary. But he is. He paused, choosing words. He reads everything he can find. He trains before the household wakes. He's fiercely loyal to Rob, to the younger children, to every person who's ever shown him kindness. And he worries constantly about being enough, about earning his place, because he thinks he's a bastard. Yes. Lyanna pressed her hands flat on the table and breathed. Is he happy? As happy as someone can be who carries the weight of being called something he isn't. Ned met her eyes. He deserves better than this, Lyanna. He deserves the truth. Not yet. When Robert can't kill him for it. She stood. I should get back before Robert notices I'm gone. Tomorrow, find a way to look into Cersei's children, quietly. Start with the genealogies. There are records in the Red Keep's library. Cross-reference them with what you observe yourself. Don't ask questions. Just watch. Ned stood as well. And you? I'll watch Cersei. I've been watching her for years. Lyanna paused at the door. And I'll watch Robert. If he starts asking questions about Jon, about the visit to Winterfell, about what he saw, I'll know before you do. I always know. She slipped out of the solar and back to the royal chambers, where Robert was snoring in his great bed, empty wine cups on the table beside him. She stood at the window and looked north. Not toward Winterfell this time. Just north. Toward everything the north meant. Cold air, honest faces, a boy with dark eyes who dreamed of dragons. Hold on, she thought again. Just hold on. The months that followed were the most dangerous of Lyanna's life. Ned investigated quietly, methodically. He visited armorers, looked at Robert's bastards, consulted genealogies. He found Gendry at Tobo Mott's forge, a massive, black-haired boy with Robert's jaw and Robert's build. He compared the boy to Joffrey, golden-haired, green-eyed, slight and cruel. He read every account of Baratheon genetics he could find. The seed is strong. Black hair, every time. For 300 years of recorded Baratheon unions, black hair dominated. Joffrey was not Robert's son. Ned brought his findings to Lyanna in fragments, through careful meetings in that same small solar. She absorbed each piece with the stillness of someone who had long ago accepted that terrible things were true. Cersei knew Ned was investigating. Lyanna could see it in the way the Queen's green eyes tracked Ned around the throne room, in the way she smiled at him with too much warmth, in the subtle pressure she applied through ladies of the court, whispers about the Northern Hand being overly interested in things that weren't his business. Meanwhile, Robert's unease about Jon Snow had not gone away. It had grown. He mentioned Jon twice more over the following weeks, once in passing, once more directly, asking Lyanna if she had corresponded with Ned's bastard. She said no, she barely knew the boy. Robert accepted this, but his eyes stayed thoughtful. Then Littlefinger made his move. He came to Robert privately. Lyanna learned about it afterward. Through her own sources, a chamberwoman she had cultivated, one of Varys's little birds she had quietly turned to her own purposes years ago. Littlefinger told Robert, over wine, that Queen Lyanna seemed unusually tender toward Lord Stark's bastard, that she had sought the boy out during the visit to Winterfell, that she had spoken with him privately in the training yard. He implied nothing specific. He never did. He simply arranged the facts into a shape that suggested something. Robert came to Lyanna that evening, with wine and a dangerous expression. You spoke to Ned's bastard at Winterfell, he said, privately, in the training yard. I watched him spar with Robb, Lyanna said calmly. I commented on his technique. He's a gifted fighter. Why would you care about Ned's bastard's fighting technique? Because he's my nephew's companion. Because I haven't been to Winterfell in 15 years, and I was watching everything with fresh eyes. She met his gaze without flinching. Is there something specific you're suggesting, Robert? He studied her. Robert was not clever in the way Tywin was clever, or Varys was clever. But he was not stupid. He had a fighter's instinct for when something was wrong. His eyes, Robert said. What about them? They're dark. Strange dark. Something about them. He stopped. rubbed his face. Probably nothing. Probably, Lyanna agreed. Robert poured more wine and let the subject drop. But he did not fully release it. Lyanna could see him chewing on it internally, the way he chewed on things he couldn't name. 3 days later, he rode out with a hunting party and did not return for 2 weeks. While he was gone, Cersei came to Lyanna. She arrived in the Queen's solar with 2 ladies and a tray of wine, a social call. Perfectly formatted, they sat and spoke of inconsequential things for 20 minutes. Cersei was charming and warm and said all the right words. Then she looked at Lyanna with those green eyes and said, very softly, "I know what Jon Arryn was investigating." "Do you?" Lyanna's voice was absolutely steady. He was looking at bloodlines, comparing features, making connections. Cersei set down her wine cup with a precise click. It would be a shame if someone were to begin that investigation again. And notice not just what Jon Arryn noticed, but other things, other bloodlines, other questions about parentage. She smiled. "Don't you think?" The threat was beautifully constructed. Cersei was saying, "I know about Joffrey, you know about Jon. We both have secrets. Let's both stay quiet." Lyanna looked at the woman who had hated her for 15 years, who had schemed against her since the wedding, who had worked patiently and poisonously to undermine everything Lyanna had built. "I think," Lyanna said carefully, "that investigations into bloodlines are dangerous things. For everyone involved." "Exactly." She left with her ladies and her wine tray, every movement graceful and unhurried. Lyanna sat alone after she was gone, and understood that the balance of power had just shifted. Cersei had information. Lyanna had information. They were in a standoff, but it was a standoff that could only hold as long as Robert didn't force the issue himself, and Robert was running out of patience. The confrontation came 40 days after Ned's arrival in King's Landing. Robert had been drinking heavily for 3 days. Something had set him off. A tournament loss by his favorite knight, an argument with the small council about finances, some combination of accumulated resentments that had built until they needed release. He came to Lyanna's chambers in the middle of the night. She woke to find him standing over her bed with a candle, his face red and sweating, his eyes carrying that particular quality of drunk determination that meant he had made a decision and was going to act on it, regardless of consequence. "Tell me the truth about the boy," he said. Lyanna sat up slowly. "What boy?" "Jon Snow. Ned's bastard." Robert's voice was thick, but his eyes were sharp. "I have been thinking about this for months. Something is wrong. Something about that boy's eyes in the firelight. Something about the way you looked at him." He stopped. "Tell me the truth. Right now. No more performances." "Rhaegar." I crushed his chest on the trident. I watched him fall. And his eyes were dark, Lyanna. Dark like indigo. Dark like almost black. And that boy has those eyes. Lyanna said nothing. "Tell me the truth." She looked at him. Robert Baratheon, King of the 7 Kingdoms. The man who had started a war for love of her. The man who would have killed her son without hesitation if he had known the truth from the beginning. She had been lying to him for 15 years. She was so tired. "Jon Snow is my son," she said. "Rhaegar's and mine." The candle shook in Robert's hand. "I went with Rhaegar willingly," she continued. Her voice was steady. "There was a ceremony, a septon, witnesses. Whether it was legal, I cannot say with certainty. But the child was real. He was born at a tower in the Red Mountains of Dorne. I nearly died in childbirth. Howland Reed saved my life. And Ned took our son and raised him as his bastard to protect him from you." Robert's face went through a sequence of emotions that Lyanna had never seen on a human face before. First shock, then a terrible dawning comprehension, then grief, genuine grief, deep and ugly, then rage. "He is a bastard," Robert said. "He is Rhaegar's bastard. And you have been lying to me for 15 years. You have been looking at me with those gray eyes and lying every single day. If I had told you the truth, you would have killed him. He was an infant, Robert. He is my son." Lyanna stood from the bed. "He is mine, and I will not apologize for protecting him." Robert hurled the candle across the room. It hit the wall and went out. In the darkness, she heard him breathing. Great, ragged breaths of a man, trying to control something that was consuming him from inside. "I want him dead," Robert said. His voice was flat and terrible. "I want the bastard dragon spawn dead. Then you'll have to kill me first." Silence. Robert did not move. Lyanna stood in the darkness of the royal chambers, her heart hammering, and did not step back. "You would go to war for Rhaegar's bastard," Robert said. "Not a question. I would go to war for my son," Lyanna said. "Yes." The door opened. Guards had heard the shouting. Robert turned and saw them and roared at them to get out. They retreated hastily, pulling the door closed. Robert stood in the darkness for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was exhausted. "Get out of my chambers. Get away from me." "I can't." He stopped. "Get out." Lyanna dressed quickly and left. She walked through the corridors of the Red Keep with her hands shaking and found Ned's quarters. She pounded on the door until he opened it, half-dressed, his hand going to his sword. "It's done," she said. "He knows." The ravens flew within the hour. Ned sent them from the rookery in the middle of the night, to Winterfell first, telling Catelyn to take the children north, to keep Jon safe, to trust no one from the capital. Then to Stannis at Dragonstone, telling him everything: the parentage of Cersei's children, the treason at the heart of the succession, the danger now breaking open in King's Landing. Lyanna sent her own ravens, to her father's bannermen, except her father was dead, to the Riverlands through Catelyn's family, to Dorne. Dorne was the piece that mattered most. She wrote to Prince Doran Martell in her own hand, without cipher, because some truths needed to be stated plainly. "Prince Doran, my son, Jon, is the true-born son of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and myself. He is alive. He is 15 years old, and he is threatened by King Robert, who has ordered his death. Rhaegar's son lives. I am asking for justice, for Elia, for her children, for Rhaegar's line. Stand with us." She sealed it and gave it to her fastest rider. Robert moved against them within 24 hours. He sent gold cloaks to arrest Ned, who was in the small council chamber when they came. Ned stood from the table and drew ice and told them to leave. The gold cloaks looked at Valyrian steel and at the lord who carried it and at each other. They left. But the city was closing around them. Robert had called in his personal guard, 50 of the most loyal men in King's Landing. He had sent ravens to Casterly Rock. Tywin would march with 40,000 men at Robert's word. Ned and Lyanna had perhaps 3 days before King's Landing became a trap with no exit. "We have to get out of the city," Ned said. They were gathered in Ned's quarters. Ned, Lyanna, Sansa, and Arya, who had come south with Ned, and the handful of household guards who remained. "The gates are being watched," Lyanna said. "Not all of them. Not yet." Ned looked at her. "There's a passage from the kitchens below the Tower of the Hand, through the old drainage tunnels to the harbor. Jon Arryn showed it to me when I arrived. He said every hand should know the ways out. One small boat isn't watched. Not at the right hour." Ned had been thinking about this. "We take the passage. We find a fisherman. We pay whatever it costs to get to Dragonstone. Stannis will give us shelter." Stannis was Robert's brother, and by all accounts a man of rigid duty, but he was also a man of rigid law. He had been investigating Cersei's children for the same reasons Jon Arryn had been. He would not send Ned and Lyanna back to Robert to be executed, not if they brought him evidence that the succession was built on incest and fraud. "All right," she said, "but Ned, Arya and Sansa come with us. I'm not leaving your daughters in the city." "Agreed." Lyanna went to Robert. She found him in the throne room, sitting not on the Iron Throne but on the steps leading up to it, a wine cup in his hand, staring at nothing. The throne room was empty except for his personal guards standing at the far walls. She walked in alone and stood before him. "Robert." He looked up. His eyes were red. "I'm leaving," she said. "Tonight. I won't fight you for the throne. I won't try to take anything that's yours. But I am taking my son and my brother and his children, and I am leaving this city. And going where? North. Eventually, to Winterfell. To the north that is mine by blood." She paused. "Jon is not your enemy. He's a 15-year-old boy who has never sat a throne, and has no desire to. He was raised Stark. He wants no Targaryen crown. He doesn't even know what he is yet. He exists," Robert said. "That's enough. It shouldn't be. He can't help who his father was." Lyanna's voice was very careful. "Robert, you are going to build something when you won the throne. Something worth fighting for. A kingdom worth having. Is this what you wanted to build? Murdering children for the crime of being born? Don't lecture me." "I'm not lecturing. I'm asking." She looked at him. "You loved me once. Before the war, before Rhaegar, before any of this, you loved me enough to fight a war. I'm asking you to let that mean something. Let it mean that you don't murder my son." Robert said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. "I can't let him be what he is, a Targaryen claimant. People will rally to him. They always rally to Targaryen claimants. Then make sure they have no reason to. Let him be Jon Snow. Let him take the black and guard the wall. He'll be no threat to anyone on the wall." Lyanna kept her voice steady. "He's already told Ned he sometimes thinks about the Night's Watch. He has no ambitions for power. He wants to belong somewhere. Let him belong at the wall." Robert stared at his wine cup for so long Lyanna thought he would not answer. "Go," he finally said. "Take your brother and his children. Take your bastard dragon spawn." His voice was bleak. "But if he ever comes south, if he ever raises a banner, if I ever hear the name Targaryen spoken in connection with him—" "You won't," Lyanna said. "I promise you." She turned and walked out of the throne room without looking back. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them against her sides. But she kept walking. They left King's Landing in the deep hours before dawn. Through the kitchen passage, through the drainage tunnels that smelled of mold and stagnant water, down to the harbor's edge, where the city's refuse met the bay. Ned led the way with a lantern. Lyanna and the girls behind him, the household guards at the rear. A fisherman named Cleos, old, weathered, accustomed to minding his own business, took their gold without comment and sailed them out of Blackwater Bay in a boat that smelled of fish and old rope. They reached Dragonstone 2 days later. The island fortress rose from the water like a dragon's dream, twisted black towers carved to look like serpents and worms, the jagged silhouette of a castle built by Targaryen hands for Targaryen purposes. It was the most imposing structure Lyanna had ever seen, and she had grown up in Winterfell. Stannis Baratheon met them in the entry hall. Robert's younger brother was lean where Robert was broad, hard where Robert was soft. He had the Baratheon jaw and the Baratheon black hair, but none of Robert's warmth. He looked at Ned and Lyanna with eyes that catalogued everything and gave nothing back. "You have evidence about Cersei's children," he said. No greeting. Stannis did not waste words. "Yes," Ned said. "Show me." They spent 3 hours at Stannis's war table going through everything Ned had gathered: genealogical records, observations about Robert's bastards, comparisons to Joffrey and Myrcella and Tommen. Stannis listened without interrupting, asked 3 precise questions, and then sat in silence for several minutes. Jon Arryn reached the same conclusion before he died. Stannis finally said, "He sent me a letter. I've been waiting for someone else to verify it independently." He looked at Ned. "Joffrey is Jaime Lannister's bastard, not Robert's son. The succession is fraudulent." "Yes," Ned said. "Then I am Robert's true heir." Stannis said it without satisfaction, as if stating a mathematical fact. "Which means Robert's war against you." He looked at Lyanna. "Is a war fought in defense of a lie?" "Yes," Lyanna said. "And the boy?" "Jon Snow." "My son," Lyanna said. "Rhaegar's and mine." Stannis studied her. "He has a claim to the throne. By blood, if the Rhaegar marriage was valid, he supersedes mine. He doesn't want the throne. He has never wanted power." Lyanna kept her voice firm. "I'm not bringing you a claimant, Lord Stannis. I'm bringing you the truth. What you do with it is your decision. But Jon Snow wants to be Jon Snow. He wants to guard the wall and keep his vows and live a life that means something." Stannis was quiet again. Then, "The Night's Watch. You've spoken to him about it?" "Indirectly. He's expressed interest himself, without prompting. If he takes the black, if he goes to the wall, he removes himself from succession politics permanently." Stannis looked at the table. "That would be useful. He deserves better than useful," Lyanna said sharply. "He deserves a choice freely made, not a solution to someone else's political problem." Stannis met her eyes. "I respect that. I'm stating the political reality. The choice must be his." Ned said quietly, "You'll shelter us here while we send for Jon?" "Yes." Stannis stood. "I've been preparing for war since Jon Arryn sent me that letter. The question was always when it would begin, not if." He looked at Ned. "I'll need you, Lord Stark, as Hand of the King, when the time comes." "When the time comes," Ned agreed. The ravens flew north to Winterfell. Catelyn had already moved the household to a defensive footing. Ned's earlier message had given her enough warning. Jon was at Winterfell, safe, surrounded by Stark men and direwolves, and the grey walls that had protected the Stark line for 8,000 years. But the message that arrived from Dragonstone was different from Ned's earlier warnings. This one was from Lyanna herself. Catelyn read it to Jon personally, in the Winterfell library, with the door barred and ghosts lying at Jon's feet. Catelyn read the whole letter in a steady voice. She did not soften any of it. Jon deserved the full truth spoken plainly. When she finished, the library was completely silent. Jon sat very still. His grey eyes in the candlelight caught that deep indigo undertone. He was looking at nothing, or at something no one else could see. "My mother is alive?" he said, not a question. "Yes." "The Queen." He processed this slowly. "She was at Winterfell. She spoke to me in the training yard." He stopped. "She said I reminded her of someone brave and sad and beautiful." "She was talking about your father," Catelyn said. Jon looked at her. "Rhaegar Targaryen." "Yes." Another long silence. "Lord Stark, Ned." Jon stopped. "Try it again." "He's not my father." "He chose to be your father," Catelyn said. "There's a difference between blood and choice. Ned chose you. Every day for 15 years, he chose you. That doesn't disappear because the blood is different." Jon looked at Ghost. The direwolf raised his head and met Jon's eyes with those unsettling red ones. "Why are you telling me now?" Jon asked. "Because your mother has confessed the truth to Robert. Because Robert now knows who you are. And because," Catelyn's voice was very careful, "because you are going to have to make a choice about who you are and what you want to be." "Robert wants me dead." Jon was quiet for a very long time. When he looked up, his expression had settled into something older than 15 years. "I don't want a throne," he said. "I've never wanted a throne. I've never wanted anything except—" He stopped. "I want to belong somewhere, to do something that matters." "The wall," Catelyn said. "Yes." He was certain about it. Catelyn could see. Not performing certainty, not saying what he thought she wanted to hear, genuinely deeply certain. "There's something at the wall. Something wrong. The old stories." He glanced at Ghost. "I believe the old stories. About the long night. About what's beyond. Someone needs to be there who understands what's coming." "Jon." "I'm not running away," he said. "I know how it might look. Like I'm hiding. But I'm not. I think I'm supposed to be there. I think that's what this is for." He touched his chest. "All of it. The blood, the dreams, everything. Something is coming that makes thrones meaningless." Catelyn looked at the boy she had protected for 15 years. The boy who was Lyanna's son, and Rhaegar's son, and in every way that had mattered every day of his life, Ned's son. "Then, we'll get you to Dragonstone first," she said. "You need to meet your mother." The journey from Winterfell to Dragonstone took 3 weeks. Robb came with them. He would not hear of staying behind, along with a company of northern soldiers and the direwolves. Catelyn took Bran, Rickon, and Sansa north to the safety of Winterfell's deeper halls, leaving Robb to represent the family. They sailed from White Harbor, the Manderley fleet providing escort. Jon stood at the prow for most of the voyage, watching the water. Ghost stood beside him. He did not say much. He was processing something that could not be processed quickly. On the 3rd night out of White Harbor, Robb came and stood beside him. "Does it change anything?" Robb asked. "Between us?" Jon looked at his brother, his cousin by blood, his brother by everything else. "Does it change anything for you? You're my brother. Blood doesn't, no. Then it doesn't change anything for me either." Jon looked at the water. "I'm Jon. I'm always going to be Jon. Robb, I don't want to be anything else." Robb put his arm around Jon's shoulders, the way he had since they were children, and they stood together at the prow while the northern coast slid past. Dragonstone appeared on the horizon at dusk. Jon saw it first. He stood at the prow with his hands on the rail and watched the black towers rise from the sea, carved into dragon shapes, built by hands that shared his blood. It should have felt like something profound, homecoming, recognition, destiny. It felt like a strange dream, important but not quite real. Stannis Baratheon met them in the harbor. Jon had never met Stannis. The Lord of Dragonstone was lean and hard and said very little, but when he looked at Jon, something shifted in his expression. The first real emotion Jon had seen cross his face. "You have your father's eyes," Stannis said. I've been told, Jon said, not Ned Stark's eyes. Rhaegar's. Stannis studied him. You understand what you represent. I understand that I'm an inconvenience to everyone's succession plans, Jon said, including yours. Then, remarkably, the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something in that direction. Ned Stark's manner. Whatever the blood says. I'll take that as a compliment. Ned appeared behind Stannis, and behind Ned, Jon had known this moment was coming for 3 weeks. He had tried to prepare for it. He thought he had. He was entirely unprepared. Lyanna Stark stood in the doorway of Dragonstone's harbor gate. She was 32 years old, lean and dark-haired, with the Stark long face and gray eyes. She was wearing northern gray for the first time in 15 years, without the trappings of a queen, and she looked more herself than any portrait or description had captured. She looked like him. She stood very still as Jon walked toward her. He stopped 3 feet away and they looked at each other, his mother and her son meeting for the first time since he was hours old. Jon, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. He closed the 3 feet between them and she pulled him into her arms and held him with 15 years of grief compressed into a single embrace. Her hands gripped him with the ferocity of a woman who had given up the right to hold him on the day he was born and had been paying for it every single day since. Jon held her back. He was taller than her. He hadn't expected that, somehow. She was smaller than the idea of her. He felt her shaking. I'm sorry, she said into his shoulder. I'm so sorry. I know, he said. Caitlin told me everything. She pulled back and looked at his face. Her hands framed his jaw. Her eyes were running down his features like she was memorizing them, the way you memorize something you've been waiting a lifetime to see clearly. You look like a Stark, she said. I am a Stark, he said. Yes, her eyes were bright. You are. You're a Stark, Jon. In every way that matters, you are a Stark. But I'm also ice and fire. She touched his face. Both. You're allowed to be both. They stood there in the doorway of Dragonstone while the sun fell into the sea behind them, and Ned watched from a few steps back with an expression that was grief and relief and love in equal measure. And Robb stood with his hand on his sword hilt, not because there was any threat, but because he didn't know what else to do with himself. In the weeks that followed, war was decided, and Jon Snow made his choice. Stannis called his banners. The North and Riverlands rallied behind Ned and Lyanna. Howland Reed emerged from Greywater Watch for the first time in 15 years, traveling to Dragonstone to provide his testimony about the Tower of Joy, his Cranogman's word confirming everything Lyanna had said. Dorne responded to Lyanna's raven with controlled fire. Oberyn Martell sailed north personally to meet with Stannis and Lyanna, his dark eyes taking in Jon with an expression that mixed grief for Elia with something harder to name. Rhaegar's son, Oberyn said, looking at Jon. He abandoned Elia for your mother. He set her aside, or took a second wife. We'll never know which. And then he died, and his children died, and Elia died, and the realm bled for 15 years. I know, Jon said. Are you going to apologize for him? No. I can't apologize for what someone else did. Jon met Oberyn's gaze steadily. But Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch killed Elia and her children. They should answer for that. Whatever blood I carry has nothing to do with that debt. Oberyn studied him for a long moment. You really don't want the throne? No. Dorne will stand with Lyanna and her son, for Elia's sake and for justice's sake. He paused. And because Tywin Lannister has been unpunished for 15 years, and a war against Robert means a war against the Lannisters, and I have been waiting for that war. Robert's coalition was strong. The Stormlands, the Lannister army, parts of the Crown lands, but it was not unified. Stannis' refusal to support Robert had fractured the Baratheon cause fundamentally. Many lords who might have fought for Robert out of feudal loyalty balked at the idea of fighting to murder a teenage boy who had done nothing wrong. The Second Battle of the Trident was fought on a cold morning with frost on the ground. Robb commanded the northern vanguard. He was 17 years old and moved through the battle with the tactical brilliance that would have made him legendary in another life. Flanking movements, feints, coordinated strikes that hit the Lannister line at precisely its weakest points. The northern lords called him the Young Wolf, and they were not wrong. Oberyn led the Dornish forces with furious precision, hunting Lannister commanders through the chaos with personal vengeance in his dark eyes. Jon fought in the center. He had been given Longclaw, a Valyrian steel bastard sword taken from the Mormont armory, gifted by Mage Mormont, who said she had been saving it for someone worthy. He fought with the fluid precision that had puzzled Ser Roderick Cassell for years, that combination of northern discipline and something older, the grace of a man who moved like music. Robert came for him directly. The king was 50 yards away when Jon saw him, enormous, gray-bearded, wearing black armor with the crowned stag of Baratheon on his chest. He wielded his warhammer, the same weapon that had killed Rhaegar on this same river 15 years ago. He was looking directly at Jon. They fought for 5 minutes that felt like 50. Robert was terrible and magnificent in his rage. The warhammer moved in arcs that could crush horses, and Jon gave ground constantly, circling, letting Robert's own fury drain him. The man was older now, heavier, slower than he had been at the Trident, but angrier, and anger added something to his strength. Jon disarmed him finally, not with power, but with precision, catching the hammer's haft at the right angle, and using Robert's own momentum to send it spinning away. Robert went to one knee. Jon stood over him with Longclaw at his throat. Robert looked up. His face was bleeding from a cut on his cheek. His eyes were full of something that was not just rage, recognition, grief, the whole weight of a life that had gone wrong. "Finish it," Robert said. "End it." "No," Jon said. He lowered the sword. "I won't kill you. I never wanted to kill you." Robert stared at him. "You loved my mother," Jon said. "You fought a war for her. I know that. She told me." He stepped back. "She doesn't hate you either. She's just tired. We're all tired." Robert's shoulders dropped. It looked like something leaving his body. Some tension he had carried so long he had forgotten it was there. He did not die that day, not by Jon's hand. He died an hour later, during a final desperate charge into the Dornish lines, still fighting, still swinging, refusing to yield to anything or anyone. A Dornish spear caught him in the gap beneath his arm. Robert Baratheon fell from his horse and did not rise. His last word, according to the man who held his hand as he died, was Lyanna. Tywin Lannister made the calculation he had made once before, at the end of Robert's rebellion, when he sacked King's Landing and presented the Targaryen children's bodies as a pledge of loyalty to whoever would win. He withdrew the Lannister forces and sent envoys to negotiate terms. The coalition's terms were precise. The Lannisters would retain Casterly Rock and the Westerlands, but Tywin would surrender Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch to Dornish justice for the murders of Elia Martell and her children. No negotiation on this point, no substitutes. Tywin looked at the terms for a long time. He knew what Dornish justice would mean for Gregor and Amory. He had used them specifically because they were loyal instruments with no Lannister name, expendable if they ever became inconvenient. He accepted. Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch were delivered to Dornish custody at the crossing of the Mander. Oberyn Martell received them personally. What followed was not described in any official account, but justice, in whatever form it took, was finally delivered. In the throne room of the Red Keep, on a morning 3 weeks after the battle, Jon Targaryen stood before the Iron Throne. The throne was hideous. He had known that intellectually from descriptions, but seeing it was something else. A massive, ugly chair made from 1,000 defeated swords, melted and twisted by dragon fire, into something that was less furniture than monument to conquest. It cut its occupants, apparently. Aerys had been called the Mad King and the Bleeding King. The throne drew blood from those who sat in it. The assembled lords of Westeros waited for him to sit. Ned stood to his left. Lyanna stood to his right. Robb was behind him with the northern lords. Stannis stood to one side with the Baratheon contingent, hard-faced, waiting his duty clear to him if not yet declared. Oberyn Martell leaned against a pillar with his arms folded. Varys stood quietly near the door, watching everything with those pale violet eyes, his expression suggesting he already knew what was going to happen. Jon looked at the throne for a long time. He thought of Robert dying on the battlefield saying Lyanna's name. He thought of Rhaegar reading a prophecy and deciding that prophecy gave him the right to abandon his family and start a war. He thought of Lyanna trapped in southern chambers for 15 years, looking north through glass. He thought of Ned carrying a secret alone until it bent him double, and Catelyn protecting someone else's child with the same ferocity she gave her own. He thought of what Robb had said at the prow of the ship, with the sea running past. "You're my brother. That's all. That's everything." Jon looked at the Iron Throne and felt nothing he recognized as desire. He turned to face the assembled lords. "I have a claim to this throne by blood," he said. "I acknowledge that. Rhaegar Targaryen was my father. My parents were married before a septon. The claim is real. The hall was absolutely silent. I'm not going to sit in that chair, Jon said. A ripple went through the assembled lords. Not shock. Many had expected this. But something released in the room. Like a collective held breath finally let go. Stannis Baratheon is Robert's true heir, Jon continued. By law, by succession, by every principle of inheritance that the Seven Kingdoms has been built on. If the realm needs a king, Stannis stepped forward. His face gave away nothing, but his eyes acknowledged what Jon had just done. But before any of that matters, Jon said, there's something else. The reports from the wall are getting worse, Jon said. Lord Commander Mormont has been sending ravens, wildlings fleeing south by the thousands, ranging parties that don't return. Men who come back wrong, with blue eyes and cold hands. Things beyond the wall that the Watch can't name. He paused. The long night is coming, and the Iron Throne means nothing if the dead come south. The hall was silent. I'm going to the wall, Jon said. Not because I'm running from anything. Not because I'm afraid of what I am, but because someone needs to be there who understands what's coming. Someone who will be believed. Someone who can send for help before it's too late. He looked at Lyanna. My mother nearly died to bring me into the world. A secret was carried for 15 years to keep me alive. I don't intend to waste that. He looked at Stannis. Will you send men and supplies north when I call for them? Stannis held his gaze. Yes. And dragonglass. There are deposits at Dragonstone. Obsidian. It kills the White Walkers. I need it mined and sent north. Done. Jon looked at his mother. Lyanna had been watching him with an expression he was still learning to read, something between fierce pride and overwhelming grief. The face of a woman who had sacrificed everything for this person standing before her, and was now watching him choose to sacrifice himself in turn. I know this isn't what you wanted, he said. 15 years of secrets, and this is what I choose to do with them. It's exactly what I wanted, Lyanna said. Her voice was steady. I wanted you to be free to choose. Whatever you chose, I wanted it to be yours. She paused. I'm proud of you. Jon closed the distance between them, and she held him for what might be the last time in a long time. Or not. The wall was far, but it was not the end of the world. Not yet. The epilogue was not written in histories or songs. It happened quietly, the way most important things do. In the Godswood of Winterfell, on the first day of true autumn, Lyanna Stark stood beneath the weirwood tree. She had been allowed to return to the north. Stannis, now king of the Seven Kingdoms, had released her from any obligation to court. She was not his queen, not his prisoner, not anyone's anything except her own person and Jon's mother and Ned's sister. She was 32 years old and free for the first time since she was 16. The weirwood's carved face wept red sap. The leaves were blood red and gold. The Godswood smelled of cold earth and pine, and the particular northern autumn that Lyanna had been dreaming of for 15 years. She breathed the air. She was home. Ned came to stand beside her after a while. They stood in silence the way only people who love each other very much can stand in silence, without need for anything more. Do you regret it? He asked. Any of it? I regret that Rhaegar believed a prophecy more than he believed in the people around him. She was honest about it. I regret that children died because of choices adults made. I regret 15 years of windows and letters and pretending. She paused. I don't regret Jon. I never will. He'll be all right. At the wall. He'll be more than all right. Lyanna touched the weirwood trunk. He has Rhaegar's purpose. The thing Rhaegar was reaching for with that prophecy. The long night. The true enemy. Jon will be the one who actually faces it. Not because destiny says so. Because he chose to. That's the Stark in him. Yes, she smiled. I like to think it's me. Ned put his arm around her shoulders. It's entirely you. They stood together in the Godswood while the first autumn wind moved through the red leaves, carrying the smell of winter already on its way. Far to the north, Jon Snow was riding toward the wall. He rode with Robb, who would accompany him as far as Castle Black before returning south, and Ghost padding silently alongside the horses. The wall was 700 feet of ancient ice and older magic, built 8,000 years ago against a threat the realm had nearly forgotten. Jon had not forgotten. He rode with Longclaw at his hip and a pressed blue winter rose in his saddlebag that his mother had given him the morning he left. The same rose, dried and brittle, that she had kept for 15 years in a book beside a window facing north. It was the last flower from the tower, she had told him. I kept it all those years. Now you keep it. Only knowing it mattered, the wall appeared on the horizon at midday, an impossible white cliff stretching east and west as far as the eye could see, so large it altered the sky above it. The air changed when you approached it. Colder, older, carrying something that was not quite a sound but was close to one. A low subterranean hum, like the wall itself was holding its breath. Jon stopped his horse and looked at it. This was where he was supposed to be. He felt it with the certainty of a man who has been walking towards something for a long time without knowing it, and finally recognizes the destination. Last chance, Robb said beside him. We could turn around, go south. You just declined the Iron Throne. You could find something easier than this. There's nothing easy about thrones, Jon said. And easier isn't the same as right. Robb was quiet then. When winter comes, when whatever's beyond that wall actually comes, send for me. I'll come with every man the North can spare. I know. Jon looked at his brother. Go home, Robb. Look after them. Always. Robb clasped his arm, then pulled him into a brief, fierce embrace. Jon Snow of Winterfell, the bloody fool who turned down a throne to stand on a frozen wall. Someone had to. Robb laughed. It echoed in the cold air, warm and real. Then he turned his horse south and rode back toward Winterfell, toward the family that was waiting, toward the life that was his to live. Jon turned north. He rode toward the wall with Ghost beside him, and the blue winter rose in his saddlebag, and the knowledge of who he was finally settled in his chest. Not a weight, not a burden, but something clarified. Jon Snow, who was also Jon Targaryen, who was above all Lyanna's son and Ned's promise and his own person, riding north to face the dark. The wall rose before him, white and ancient and enormous. Jon Snow rode toward it without slowing down. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.